I want to tell you about the worst smell I've ever come across in an RV. And trust me, over the years I've come across some doozies. This wasn't a black tank problem. This wasn't mildew or a forgotten cooler of shrimp somebody left over the winter. This was a rig I pulled the cover off of after storing it for about 4 months, opened up the cabinet under the sink, and about gagged. Turned out a family of mice had moved in sometime around Thanksgiving. And they hadn't just been living there. They'd been chewing. Insulation pulled out and shredded into nests. A section of wiring gnawed clean through. And droppings in places I won't describe to you on a family channel. That rig sat unusable for 3 weeks while I dealt with the mess, and it cost me a small fortune to get the wiring sorted out right. I remember standing there in that doorway just shaking my head, because I'd done everything I thought I was supposed to do. I'd set traps before closing it up for the season. I'd even put down a couple bait stations in the storage bays, because that's what everybody told me to do. Didn't matter one bit. The mice found their way in anyway, set up shop, and did their damage long before any trap or any poison ever slowed them down. That was the moment I realized the whole approach most of us had been using was backwards from the start. Now here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. I'm not telling you that story to scare you, though it probably should scare you a little bit. I'm telling you because what happened to that rig doesn't have to happen to yours. And the fix isn't a trap, and it isn't poison. It's a trick that folks who camped long before any of us were relying on GPS or cell signal used to keep their rigs mouse-free. And it still works exactly as good today as it did back then. So stick with me here, because by the end of this video you're going to know exactly how to mouse-proof your RV using stuff you can pick up for about $5. And you're never going to need to set another snap trap or lay down another bait station again. Let's talk first about why traps and poison aren't the answer. Because I know plenty of you are already using them, and I understand why. They feel like they're doing something. But here's the problem with both. A trap only catches the mouse that's already inside. It does nothing to stop the next one from coming in through that same gap next week. And poison, well, poison's even worse in my opinion. Because a mouse that eats poison doesn't just keel over right there for you to find and dispose of. It wanders off, usually into a wall cavity or up under the floor or behind a cabinet somewhere you can't reach. And then it dies in there. And a dead mouse in a wall is a smell that gets into everything you own and doesn't leave for weeks. On top of that, if you're traveling with a dog, a cat, or you've got grandkids climbing in and out of that rig, you've now got poison sitting around at floor level where curious little hands and curious little noses can find it. I've heard from more than a few of you in the comments about a grandbaby or a pup getting into something they shouldn't have because a bait station got knocked loose or chewed open. That's not a risk I'm willing to take. And I don't think you should either. So what did folks do before all these poisons and plastic traps showed up on store shelves? They worked with the mouse's own nature instead of fighting it. See, a mouse survives out there in the world almost entirely by its nose. Its eyesight isn't much to speak of, but that sense of smell is unbelievable. And it uses that nose to find food, to find warmth, and to find a safe place to nest. That's exactly why an RV is such a target for them in the first place. To a mouse, your camper looks like a warm, dry hotel with room service, especially once the weather starts turning cold and they're looking for somewhere to hole up. But that same powerful sense of smell that draws them in is also the thing you can use to drive them right back out. And that's the whole secret behind this old trick. Now, before I get to the trick itself, I want you to understand when this problem is really at its worst, because timing matters a whole lot here. Mice don't go looking for a warm place to nest in the middle of summer. They've got plenty of options out in the open then. Plenty of food, plenty of cover. It's when that first real cold snap hits in the fall, when the nights start dropping down near freezing, that mice go into a full-on search for shelter. And that's exactly when your RV becomes the most attractive real estate in the neighborhood. If your rig's parked in storage, or even just sitting in your driveway between trips, That's the window you need to be paying the closest attention to. I've had folks tell me they never had a mouse problem all summer long, then pulled the rig out in March after a winter in storage and found a disaster. And it's because they weren't thinking about it back in September and October, when the mice were actually making their move. I first heard about this from a woman named Eleanor, camped a few sites down from me at a rally out in Ohio. Must be 15 years back now. I was telling the group about the mess I'd found in my rig that winter, the one I just told you about, and Eleanor just about laughed me out of my camp chair. She said, "Hank, my mother taught me this trick 60 years ago, and I haven't had a mouse in a camper since." And what she pulled out of her tote bag wasn't a trap. It wasn't a spray can with a skull on the label. It was a box of plain old dryer sheets. Now I know some of you are smiling right now because you've heard this one before. And some of you are shaking your head thinking that sounds too simple to actually work. I promise you it works, and there's a real reason why. That strong perfume smell in a dryer sheet, the same one that makes your towels smell nice, is completely overwhelming to a mouse's sense of smell. It's not that it hurts them or that it's some kind of poison to their system. It's that it's so strong and so foreign that it disrupts their whole ability to smell food, smell danger, and smell their way around. And mice absolutely hate that. A mouse isn't going to set up a nest somewhere that smells like a laundromat, because that smell is drowning out everything it actually needs to survive in there. Here's how you actually put this to work in your rig. You want to take those dryer sheets, the plain scented kind, doesn't need to be anything fancy or expensive, and tuck them into every spot a mouse might consider crawling into or nesting in. That means up under the sink cabinets, back in the corners of your closets, inside any storage bay from the outside, up in the engine compartment if you're in a motorhome, and especially anywhere you've got exposed wiring bundles, because that's prime chewing territory for them. Don't just toss one sheet in the middle of the rig and call it done. You want several sheets spread around because you're creating a perimeter of that smell that a mouse has to cross through no matter which way it tries to come in. Now, dryer sheets alone are a great start, but I want to give you the second half of this old trick, because Eleanor didn't stop there, and neither should you. Peppermint oil. This one goes back even further than the dryer sheet trick, and it works on that same principle of overwhelming a mouse's nose, except peppermint oil is even stronger, and it lasts a good bit longer before you need to refresh it. What you do is take some plain cotton balls, the kind you'd find in any bathroom cabinet, soak them good in peppermint oil, and place them in the same spots I just described, especially anywhere you've had trouble before or anywhere there's a gap leading to the outside. A little bottle of peppermint oil runs you about $4 or $5 at the store, and one bottle is going to last you the better part of a whole season, because you don't need much on each cotton ball to do the job. Some folks like to mix it half and half with water in a little spray bottle, and mist it around the wheel, wells and undercarriage too, since that's a common entry point mice use to climb up into the rig from underneath. I'll be honest with you, when Eleanor first told me this, I figured it was one of those old wives' tales that sounds nice but doesn't hold up. So I tried it that very winter, storing my rig same as I always did. Dryer sheets and peppermint-soaked cotton balls, tucked into every spot I could think of, refreshed once a month through the cold season. Come spring, I pulled that cover off expecting the worst after what I'd been through the year before. Nothing. No droppings, no chewed wiring, no smell. And I want to be straight with you. I've been doing it that way every winter since, going on 15 years now, and I have not had a single mouse problem in any rig I've owned since that day. That's not luck. That's the trick working exactly the way Eleanor's mother taught it to her, and the way somebody probably taught it to her mother before that. Now, I do want to add something important here, because a scent trick alone, as good as it is, works even better when you pair it with keeping the mice from finding a way in to begin with. This isn't a trap or a poison. so it still fits with what we're talking about today. But it's the other half of doing this right. Mice can squeeze through a gap about the size of a dime. That's it. A dime. So walk around your rig and look for any place a wire, a pipe, or a cable passes through the frame or the underbelly, because those little gaps are exactly where they're getting in. For sealing those up, you want steel wool, not caulk by itself, because mice can chew right through caulk or foam insulation like it's nothing, but they cannot chew through steel wool. Stuff a little wad of steel wool into the gap first, then seal over the top of it with caulk if you want it looking clean and keeping moisture out. That combination stops them cold, because even if the smell wasn't enough to turn them away, they physically can't get through that barrier to find out. And don't skimp on how much steel wool you pack into a gap either. A thin little wisp of it isn't going to cut it, especially in a spot a mouse really wants to get through. Pack it in there good and tight, filling the whole gap from front to back, not just plugging the opening on the outside. A mouse that finds steel wool packed loose will just work at it a little at a time until it gives way. But a gap stuffed full and tight, they'll give up on and move along to look for an easier way in, which by that point they're not going to find, because you've handled every other gap on the rig the same way. Between the dryer sheets, the peppermint oil, and a roll of steel wool, you are looking at spending right around $5 total. And every bit of that will last you multiple seasons if you store it properly between trips. Now, I know some of you have probably tried those little ultrasonic plug-in gadgets that promise to run mice off with sound waves nobody can hear. I've had folks ask me about those plenty of times, and my honest answer is I've never had one work reliably, and neither has anybody I trust who's actually tested them out. Some claim it does something. Most say it did nothing at all. And either way, you're spending $20 or $30 on a gadget with batteries or wiring that can fail on you without any warning. And then you find out it quit working 3 months ago when you're already knee-deep in a mouse problem. The old trick doesn't have batteries to die. It doesn't have a circuit board that can short out from moisture. It's just scent, and scent doesn't need power to keep doing its job. Let me get a little more specific on those entry points too, because it does depend some on what kind of rig you're running. If you've got a travel trailer or a fifth wheel, your biggest risk spots are usually where the water lines and the electrical cables pass through the underbelly, plus anywhere the slide-out mechanism creates a gap when it's retracted. Mice are drawn right to those slide mechanisms, because there's often a little bit of a channel there that leads straight up into the living space. If you're in a motorhome, you've got all that on top of the engine compartment itself, which is practically an invitation, warm from recent driving, full of wiring, and usually got a gap or two around the firewall leading right into the cab. Take a flashlight and get down on your knees and actually look at these spots on your specific rig, because a 5-minute inspection tells you exactly where to focus your dryer sheets, your peppermint oil, and your steel wool instead of guessing at it and hoping you covered the right places. Compare that to what mouse damage actually costs you. I already told you what that first incident cost me in wiring repairs alone, and that doesn't even count the time the rig was sitting useless in a shop instead of out on the road where it belongs. I've heard from folks in the comments who've had chewed propane lines, chewed brake lines even, which is a whole different level of dangerous, not just expensive. A $5 prevention trick against that kind of risk isn't even a close call. Now let me give you a word of caution here too, because I want you doing this right. If you're storing your rig for an extended period, don't just set those dryer sheets and cotton balls once and forget about them. That scent does fade over time, especially in extreme heat or extreme cold. And a mouse that wandered off in November might come right back around in February once that smell's weakened enough. Make it part of your routine. Every time you check on a stored rig, whether that's once a month or every time you swing by to make sure the battery's holding up, take 2 minutes and refresh whatever's lost its punch. It's a small habit, but it's the difference between a rig that stays mouse-free all winter and one that doesn't. I heard from a fella a while back goes by the name Frank in the comments on one of my other videos, who told me he'd been doing a version of this trick for going on 20 years with his fifth wheel. Except his wife swears by using it with cinnamon oil instead of peppermint, since that's what she had on hand the first time and it worked just as well. That tells you something important. It's not that peppermint oil has some magic ingredient nothing else has. It's the strength and the strangeness of the smell to a mouse's nose that does the work. So if peppermint's not sitting in your cabinet, but you've got something else strong and natural, there's a good chance it'll do the trick just fine too. The principle is what matters, not the exact bottle you're reaching for. I also want to mention, because I know somebody's going to ask in the comments, this works just as well whether you're storing the rig for the winter or you're actively out camping and just want to keep mice from ever becoming a problem to begin with. Plenty of you park in wooded campgrounds or out in farm country where mice are just part of the landscape, and you don't want to wait until you've got a problem to start dealing with it. Doing this as regular maintenance, even while you're using the rig all season long, keeps you ahead of it instead of playing catch-up after the damage is already done. One more thing while we're talking about old tricks, and I want to be honest with you about this one. A lot of folks your age and mine grew up with mothballs being the go-to answer for keeping mice and other critters away. And I understand why, because that's what our parents and grandparents used. And it does have a strong enough smell to bother a mouse some. But I want to steer you away from that one, and here's why. Mothballs are made from a chemical that's genuinely toxic. Not just to mice, but to you, your pets, and especially to kids. And in a closed-up space like an RV, that chemical can build up in the air over time in a way that's actually dangerous to breathe. It's a different situation than leaving mothballs in a big open garage or a cedar chest. An RV is small and it's sealed up tight for months at a stretch. And that's exactly the kind of space where that chemical smell has nowhere to go. So even though mothballs are technically an old trick too, it's not one I'm willing to pass along to you. And honestly, it's not one you need, because dryer sheets and peppermint oil do the same job without putting anybody's health at risk. I want to hear from you on this one, because I know Eleanor's not the only person out there who's got a trick like this passed down to them. Drop a comment down below and tell me what's worked for you, or if you've got your own version of this one that maybe uses something different than dryer sheets or peppermint. I read every single comment on these videos, and half the reason this channel works as well as it does is because you all keep sharing what you know. That's exactly how this stuff used to get passed around. One camper to the next, campfire to campfire, one rally to another, long before anybody thought to put it on the internet. If there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it's this. You don't need a chemical company and you don't need a hardware store trap aisle to keep your rig safe from mice. You need a box of dryer sheets, a bottle of peppermint oil, and a little bit of steel wool. And you need to actually use them regularly instead of letting them sit forgotten in a drawer. That's the whole trick. It's not fancy, it's not new, and it's exactly why it's worked for as long as folks have been camping in the first place. Go check your rig today if it's been sitting a while, especially if you haven't opened it up in a month or two, and don't wait until that first cold snap catches you off guard like it caught me all those years ago. Better to catch it early than to open that cabinet door and get hit with what I got hit with all those years back. I'm Hank Dawson. Thank you for listening to Roadside Wisdom.